Hello again, you're watching Everard Junction, and today is part 8 of the Building a Model Railway series. The focus for this part is going to be on the first main area in the yard, and that is over here for fueling locomotives and DMUs. Now, building a fuel point can be very quick if you want it to be. You can simply pick up one of the ready-made fueling points, such as the Bachmann Scencraft one, place it where you think it'll look good, glue it down, and then finish the job. However, once you actually start thinking about it, much like most things on a model railway, there is rather a lot more involved. So if you think about it logically, I want to refuel that train over there. First thing I'm going to need is the fuel itself. How is it going to get here? I've catered for that, this siding in here, so the fuel will arrive by rail in wagons. That's fine. I'm going to need somewhere to store the fuel when it's piped off the arriving train. I'm going to need somewhere where that fuel can be piped into the locomotive that requires it. I'm going to need perhaps more than one of those, because if you think about it, this is a 2-car DMU. I've got space there for 3-car DMUs, and also a locomotive could go in there. Now, on DMUs, fuel tanks can be at either or both ends, depending on what sort of DMU it is, and locomotives is self-explanatory, it's in the middle. So you're going to want to place probably 2 fueling points along there, so that depending on what comes in, you can fuel both ends of it. I'm going to need somewhere for spilt fuel to drain, so I'm going to need some sort of drainage either in the track or alongside it or near where the hoses are. And I'm also going to need somewhere for that waste fuel to be stored. In the real world, that fuel usually gets spilt onto the ground. It'll then go through a network of pipes and through an oil and water separator, and it will then get stored in a tank somewhere, which will then either be disposed of or used for other purposes. So we've only thought about a fuel point for a minute or so, and already it's a lot more involved than just buying a ready placed item off the shelf. You need some way of supplying the fuel, some way of storing the fuel, some way of loading the fuel, some way of catching the spilt fuel, and we're also going to need to think very carefully about the placement of those fueling points so that it allows locomotives of different types and DMUs of varying lengths to be used. Okay, since this area is going to be mostly used by DMUs, they are going to dictate the location of my fuel points, and then if a single locomotive comes in here, it has the freedom to move to wherever the fuel point is. So let's just take a quick look at some of the examples of DMU. This is a class 108, and this particular version is a power trailer. So you have an end with an engine in it, and then an unpowered trailer unit. So if we come back to the motor unit, you can see the engine is there. The fuel tank is there. So round about the centre of this unit with the engine in it is where you're going to want a fuel point. On a 3-car first generation DMU, such as this one, but 3 cars in length, you would have an engine at one end and an engine at the other end. And I've catered for a 3-car unit in the sidings. So, using the markings that I've placed, what you're going to have is the first unit stopping around there, the unpowered coach or trailer in the middle, and then a unit at this end. So when it comes in for fuel, because it uses both of those engines when it's running, you're going to need to fuel it at this end and fuel it at this end. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. This is a newer DMU, this is a class 150. These were called sprinters. The reason for it was because they were a lot faster, because they had an engine at either end. They were what was known as a power twin. And if we look, we have a fuel tank just there, and if we go to the other end, you can see the engine just there. We've also got a fuel tank over there. So this 2-car unit ideally needs access to 2 fuel points at exactly the same time, so it can be filled up a bit faster. So ideally I'm going to need to have 3 areas where workers can access fuel hoses and fill the tanks of these DMUs. So I've marked on the baseboard how long a 3-car version will be. The third car just finishing there. So we're going to need a fuel point somewhere around there. We're also going to need one somewhere in that sort of area, and we're going to need one over there. But because we've got 2 tracks, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to put them in the centre. Just have several hoses connected to each one, and that will allow crews to refill multiple tanks on various locomotives at the same time. It'll also allow more than one locomotive to come in on the same line and be filled at various different areas. So I could, for instance, have a Class 47 parked there being refuelled, and I could have a 31 at the other end, or whatever, whichever locomotive is running at the time. So that takes care of how many fuel points I'm going to need and their location. Next thing to do is to come over to the slightly shorter siding, which will be used for the delivery of the fresh fuel. I'm going to need some way of unloading it from this siding, and I'm also going to need a way to store it. Okay, I've got a fuel tank. This was a ratio kit, I believe, and I've made a little wall that goes around the edge of it. The wall is used for the situation that can happen if the tank is to fail. If you look at any pictures of large barrels or storage containers for flammable liquid, they often have a little wall around them, and that is to prevent the fuel or whatever is being contained from spilling all over the place. So if that tank was to fail, all of the fuel would drain out and just sit in like a giant paddling pool of diesel, rather than actually spreading all over the place and causing a much bigger problem. I've made it out of some Slater's brick plasticard. It's just literally glued around the edge of the existing base for the kit. So that will be a rough position for that fuel storage tank. It'll have some more painting done to it and perhaps some signage later on. Next thing I'm going to do is perhaps a little bit of hard standing and some sort of drainage, so that if there were to be any spillages when unloading the wagons, then it will be contained. I'm going to have a little pipe somewhere with some hose, so that the tanks, when they arrive, can be connected up. Most of the fuel piping in places like this was run underground, not very deep, but it'd be run underground because it's dangerous and keeps it out of the way. That's common practice with most large places when fuel is handled. Another example of that would be airports. All of the flammable liquids are piped underground. So I don't need to represent any piping, so I can have the tank sitting there, and I can have an unloading device somewhere along here, or even on the other side, and then it will just be assumed that the piping goes underground, and it will come up and go into the tank. And that the same sort of thing will be represented with the fuel points along here. There'll be various fuel points. They'll have hoses and pumps hooked up to them, and it'll again be assumed that the piping runs underground and goes to the pipe onto the fuel tank. Okay, so making some good progress on the 3 small fuel points. The blue tubes are the supports for the small roofs, which I'm going to be putting over the top. But at the moment I've reached a good space where they're ready to have an initial coat of grey, get the basic colour in there, and then I can start picking out the finer detail, and I can add some figures and some extra bits and pieces to them, and then finally I'll put the roof on. I'll be adding lighting to them. The blue tubes are indeed hollow, and they are big enough to take a relatively fine gauge wire, so there'll be a small LED in the centre of each one. I don't want to light them up too well. The real things are quite poorly lit, at least they were 25 years ago, so it'll just hopefully just have a nice sort of soft glow and really set the mood for the area in the night time. Okay, so I've been busy painting them up. I've gone for some quite dark matte colours, because they are in real life rather oily, dirty, smelly, unpleasant things to work with. So I've gone for some quite dark colours, and I think they're looking really good now. Painted the hoses black. The boxes housing the pumps are very, very dark green, and then obviously the drainage and the deck is very dark grey, and then I've gone for a sort of red oxidey type colour for some of the plumbing. Touch of silver on the ends of some of the hoses just to indicate where the connectors are for hooking onto the diesel tanks in the trains. So far they've all just been made out of odds and ends. The pump boxes are some relay boxes made by 10 Commandments, which I didn't have a use for. They're a cast item, and I've just chopped the tops off them to square them up a little bit, and then painted them green. The hoses are made out of solder, lovely material to use for representing hoses. It bends to any shape and holds that shape, very handy. The red oxide sections where the plumbing is coming from the pumps, they are just made out of bits of sprue. Whenever you build a kit, chances are it will come in a sprue. Some sprues are made out of round bar like this, and then others use square sections. They're both extremely useful, very, very handy indeed. So I've used those, and then the tubes that will be holding the small canopies, they're just the plastic sticks that you get from cotton buds or Q-tips if you're in America. The mesh for the drainage, that is a sheet that you can buy from sort of car DIY sort of shop. The actual purpose of the sheet is for reinforcing repairs when you're using massive amounts of body filler. It is, however, very useful for representing the drainage. It's probably a touch overscale, but doesn't bother me. I think the effect looks good, and there'll be plenty of weathering to do along that for where all the fuel spillages have drained. Using the sprue again, I've made a fill pipe for the fuel storage tank, so when the locomotives are refueled, the fuel will drain out of the tank down there, but to pump the fuel in, it will need to go obviously into the top. Using a couple of reference photographs, I've made this pipe. If I can find a little wheel or valve or something, I'll put that on there as well. I've also made a little unloading section for the wagons when they arrive. So the wagons will turn up, they'll be connected up to this, which will then be pumped and go into the fuel storage tank. So we're getting quite a few of the pieces, quite a few of the main pieces that we need to get this area looking right. So I think at this point I'm going to take them back up onto the railway, get things in position, see what we're missing, see what needs to be improved, and anything that needs to be added. Okay, I put everything roughly in position. I'm quite pleased with how it's looking. Certainly better than just an off-the-shelf item just on its own somewhere. So we got the storage tank. That's looking much better with a proper fill pipe attached to it. That's pretty much the final position for that one. The unloading spot might go there, might go elsewhere. That's up for debate at the moment. I also might make some more of those, but it's only a small refueling area. This isn't a big yard, it's just a small operation. So you're only going to have perhaps 1 or 2 tankers coming in here. It is only a small fuel tank anyway. So I think 1 will be sufficient for now, but I might make another one as well. The refueling points themselves looking pretty good. Again, they're roughly placed, so I might play around with them, but very happy with how they're looking. So we've pretty much got everything we need now. We've got a way for the fuel to be delivered, be shunted into there. We've got somewhere for it to be stored in there. Got a way for it to be unloaded, and we've got somewhere where it can be supplied into waiting diesels or DMUs. The only thing that we're missing is a pump to pump the fuel from here into the tank. Pumps over here, I've got a small pump on each one, so that's catered for, at least on the scenic side of things. I think we need a small building for a larger pump that will pump from the wagon to the tank. I've got a little shed left over from the scrapyard scene. I think with a little bit of weathering and a little bit of pathway around it, I think that'll look quite good. That'll serve the purpose. It's nice as well because it's a little prefabricated shed. It's not a brick-built structure, so again it sort of is in keeping with the small operation that this is. This isn't a big depot or big, stopover for engines and DMUs. This is just a small point for some locos to come and grab some fuel. I'll probably put it somewhere like that. I'm going to need to place the pump in between the destination for the fuel and the unloading point for the fuel. So if you picture it running underground, the pipe go into the pump and then into the tank. Okay, so now I know where the fuel points are and where the areas of hard standing and drainage are. I can now think about where I'm going to put my ballast and where I'm going to put any sort of green stuff as well. As the ballast fans out into sidings in the yard, I'm going to try and reduce it a little bit. So over here it's quite established, used regularly, so we've got quite a lot of ballast, as you would see on, say, a main line or a big yard. And then as we come further into the yard, I want to try and thin that ballast out a little bit to give the yard sort of that bit of age and that sort of lightly used sort of look. These sidings aren't going to see a lot of action. Anything that comes in is going to be going very slowly, and it'll come in, it'll stop for a bit, and then it'll leave. So there's not going to be a massive need for big ballast shoulders and lots of ballast in between the sleepers. So I'm going to try and thin it out a little bit, see what we get. We're also going to need some buffer stops. Really happy with these Pico buffer stops. I think they look really good. I've also made sure that these two sidings are ever so slightly different lengths. So this buffer stop is ever so slightly further back. Again, it just adds to that sort of old, lightly used sort of look. Okay, so continuing with making progress on detailing the fuel points themselves. I've run some cable up through the tubes, and I've soldered in a very, very small surface mount type LED. It should give a nice light spread through there, should look quite good. Started making the canopies, which are just going to be glued at the top, on top of those tubes, and protect the equipment from any rain. So they're just made out of some plasticard that's in the shape of corrugated roofing, which I believe I got from Slater's. I've had these sheets of plasticard for a very long time, so I could be wrong there. But yeah, they're coming on nicely. I've angled them, as you can see, much like the pictures of the real things that I've been researching. So I'll paint the rest of them, glue them on, and put them back on the layout. Okay, the ballast has now dried whilst I've been making the fuel points. I've got the fuel points back in position and ready to just give a test with a loco running past for checking of clearance with the canopies. Should all be fine, but just want to be doubly sure. To get rid of any glue residue that's dry to the top of the rails, I just use an ordinary Pico track rubber, and that does a nice job of just gently removing any PVA glue that's dried to the surface of the rails. Very happy with how the fuel points are looking. They need extra detail such as figures, weathering, barrels and a few other bits and pieces, but for now they'll be okay. I'll just leave them in situ and build up the rest of the scene with them in place. I've also added in another walkway, just using that plasticard. I've glued that just across there to get access to the building that contains the pump, the diesel pump that will pump from the unloading area here into the storage tank over here. You can see the LEDs just hiding in the tops of the canopies there. The wires will be painted to try and conceal them a little better at a later date, and they'll also be wired up a little bit later on once I get some switches in place for depot lighting. I'm just going to bring in the DMU, see how things look, check for clearance. Doesn't foul any of the canopies. It looks really good. Okay, the only thing left to do is to try and find somewhere to put a waste oil collection tank. I think I'll probably put it somewhere around there so it can be served by a small side road and be collected by some sort of road tanker. There's still lots of detail and weathering and figures and bits and pieces to add, but I want to try and make some more progress on the ballasting and getting all of the sort of ground stuff around the track sorted. And I've got loads to do over here. So I'm going to leave this area for now. I'm going to move on to another area in the yard, and then once all the hard standing and walkways and ballast and all of that stuff is down, I'm going to start on doing the green scenery and get some of the grasses in and really bring the area to life.